Good day, everyone across North America. This is John Garmendi from Sony's Professional Display Solutions of America, welcoming you back to a special edition of our Tech Tuesday webinars. As you know, these webinars were created so that our channel partners, integrators, alliance partners, consultants, and end users can stay informed and up to date on the latest in Sony products and solutions. And today, we're going to be joining our alliance partner, Spectrio, for a special edition entitled Boosting Employee Engagement. Before we start, a few items of housekeeping. As you can see, I'm in a different location this week. I'm at our headquarters, actually, in 25 Madison Avenue in New York City. So before we jump in, just to repeat, we're going to be taking your questions as always in the in-event question panel. We'll post links, relevant links to anything that we mentioned today in the chat panel, as well as a link to all of our previously archived Tech Tuesday webinars. So joining me today will be Jimmy Hunt, Senior Vice President of Business Development for Spectrio, Christian Armstrong, Senior Director of Business Development for Spectrio, and Jay Leedy, Head of Business Development for Sony Professional Display Solutions. I'm going to turn it over to Jay now. He'll moderate, and then I'll join you back here for Q&A.
Thanks, John, and welcome, Jimmy and Christian. Happy to have you on this Tech Tuesday on this fine day in May. I think for the audience, before we get into how to boost employee engagement and the framework that we want to cover, maybe a little bit of a background on Spectrio in general and how you've grown to become so relevant in this market would be really helpful for our audience. Um, Jimmy or Christian, either one of you want to take a swing at helping us better understand where Spectrio is coming from and kind of where you're headed?
Yeah, absolutely, Jay. Thanks for having us. And yeah, to give you a little bit of background on Spectrio, we've been in business for about 30 plus years. The company got its roots in on-premise music and messaging and on-hold music and messaging solutions. And over the past, I'd say 20 years, we've really transitioned the business to be about 70% focused on digital signage and employee or audience engagement technology. So complementary solutions like continuing the where we started with on-hold messaging and on-premise music, but then also moving into things like Wi-Fi marketing on-premise, scent marketing, and then a big part of what we do is also content creation. So developing video and static assets for digital signs, broadcast, and more.
Oh, really interesting. So, in addition to this really rich, history in content management and software that is optimized to enable delivery of content that's, really suited for corporate communications and, employee engagement, you have a creative services offering as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about your creative services and how you really structure that to tailor to these types of clientele?
Yes, certainly. And once again, thank you so much. It's exciting to be here. We have a long-standing partnership with Sony. Jay, it's always good to see you again. Yeah, so content is a big. Um, we believe that the days of having a single screen with static imagery are over. We believe that we want to use content to help tell a story. So we always start there and say, what story are we trying to tell, and what problem are we going to solve? And we believe that content strategy is really the way to go about that. So we have a global network of videographers that allow us to go into any given market and capture hyper-local content, allowing local businesses or large enterprise brands the ability to create stories and then showcase that on the displays.
Really interesting. So, content, I think in the context of digital signage is a pretty well-known commodity, right? Visual elements that are animations, videos, still images, maybe some dynamic feeds that can drive automated content. But you guys have a really interesting offering, and Christian touched on it the very top of this around scent marketing and on hold or call waiting services. Can you maybe give us some insight on how those kind of come together to create a more comprehensive corporate communications and branding identity strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the gist of it is if we can give an organization the ability to control how they're perceived by their audience and control how they're communicating with their audience in multiple different senses, we have the ability to help inspire the right actions out of that audience member, whether that's influencing them to get on the right flight or helping them understand critical business functions or how they're performing or how their teams are performing in a specific function. So, there's multiple ways that those things can be combined. Not every customer is going to consume all of those solutions, but if you look at from a vertical based standpoint, retail is going to be consuming almost all of those, whereas you may have a hospitality client who's consuming a bit of that, right? So it gives us the ability to help customers to consolidate services under one roof and control all of the different engagement points that you may have throughout the time that they're in your premise or engaged with your content.
Yeah, and
Really?
Christian, that's extremely well said. I would like to add that we like to look at it as the entire customer journey, right? So to Christian's point, depending on the industry or vertical or location, not every consumer or client's going to interact with all those. However, we want to be a cohesive message across all. So the music and messaging will line up with the content on the screens and vice versa. So we really like to look at the entire customer journey and make sure that we're walking them through, and each message point, each touch point will be running in parallel.
Terrific. So expanding a little bit on this, I think it'd be maybe interesting for our audience to understand. Obviously, we can see a splash of some of the key clients that you have, from Dick's to Lego, um, and even WeWork, which is obviously a very unique working environment with a very fluid kind of audience, generally speaking. So uh, maybe next we can look at some examples of how you're bringing corporate communication and employee engagement into these environments. And maybe Christian, you could kind of take us through some of these examples and talk through, some of the use cases that we're seeing here.
Yeah, absolutely. So if the slides on the screen just show a couple of high level examples. When we're talking about employee engagement and corporate communications, you're really talking about multiple areas within a facility. So when you walk into a office building, you're typically greeted with a lobby, and the content that you're displaying there is much more promotional in nature. It's defining the culture, helping to brand the experience to whether that's a visitor or to the employee. And then as you proceed into a facility, the content and the engagement becomes a bit more deliberate to engage employees, right? So when you look at some of these examples, you'll see a few different touch points, whether that's video wall in a lobby to help aid in the brand experience and showcase what makes that company great. Then you go into areas like a break room or a cafe where the communications are much more deliberate toward a captive audience, that being the employees, and we'll talk a bit about how we engage with them. And then, even when you're looking at internals, like the image on the right, where you have things like wayfinding for large offices, where, even if you are an employee who's in the building all day, every day, you may need some help getting to a different area of the building that you don't frequent, right? And understanding where different coworkers may be at. So that's typically where we look at digital signage is how do we communicate impactful messaging that's going to help the audience, whether that throughout whatever their journey is through a facility, or what actually makes sense for them based on their job function and what you need to communicate with them.
And it's interesting that you bring up the idea of customer journey, because it's so often directly tied with retail and kind of the idea of helping shoppers in particular move through an environment and make educated buying decisions, promote products, and highlight maybe deals or promotions that they might otherwise not know about. But I wonder if you could maybe expand on your learnings in the value of corporate communications within retail corporate environments and heightening both customer experience at the store level or um, optimizing operations that is generally not seen by customers as they visit those retail environments, but are
Mhm.
ultimately benefited through these types of deployments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's corporate communications in a retail store has been a really popular subject for us these days with a lot of our retail clients and a lot of the conversations we're having with net new retailers. And when you look at a retail store, most people are immediately thinking about how do we engage with the consumer? And well, that's really, really critical. And we do a lot of work there. You mentioned Dick's Sporting Goods, you mentioned Lego. The interesting thing about it is we're seeing a ton of traction around how we can enhance the engagement with employees and help them understand not only how they're performing and how their store is performing, but also how can we improve things like customer satisfaction? How do we improve things like just bringing all of the different types of communications that employees in corporate headquarters have access to, but a store associate doesn't necessarily have. They don't have access to things like email. They don't have access to necessarily even a desktop computer to get to an intranet very frequently. So leveraging digital signage communications helps us bridge that gap and engage with employees through a medium that most of them are actually very used to consuming, right? Everyone has a TV set at home. You understand this in concept. So bringing that communication to a break room, bringing entertaining content alongside corporate content and corporate communications can really help bridge that gap and engage with employees who really may feel a bit disconnected and not as included as folks who are working in the office.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead,
wonderful point
Jimmy.
there, Christian and Jay. Just to add there. I mean, everyone feels this pain post COVID of trying to get the right hires and retain those hires. It is a difficult workplace for everyone across all verticals and industries, and so not only is it one way to help retain, but it's also to train. And I think a big part of it is to help train remote hybrid employees of what's happening and to help with their performance, but also just to make them feel included, right? Human again and say, hey, we're not going in the office Monday through Friday. We missed that. I think everyone at first was excited to be at home and be with their pets and their kids and stuff, but now it's a challenge, and we are finding that our clients and employees are really engaging our solutions and services simply in some cases to help their employees feel more included, to make them feel like they're part of something, and then I would say lastly to this point, this is a perfect tie back in, Christian, I won't derail us too much, but it's a perfect tie back into content, right? So what if we all agree that those are the things we need to do, how do you actually communicate that? How do you actually help with training in a way that may be in someone's break? They may have 15 minutes in the break room. You
Mm-hmm.
have to be very specific and clear with that communication. We found that leveraging content and video content is a wonderful way to do so.
Yeah, it's a great point, and we have some stats here highlighting some of the challenges that I think um, certainly as a result of the pandemic have accelerated and expanded into a number of sectors that maybe didn't experience some of these distributed and varied work schedules that retail and a number of other sectors have been living as a reality for a long time. Christian, you mentioned that in some cases the retail workers in the store may not have access to a desktop or in some cases even an email address. But now we've got a situation in many cases in traditional corporate environments where you've got a hyper diverse type of environment where people are working from anywhere at any time in some cases and have become accustomed to that. Um, I think there's opportunities obviously for reaching people in the way that they want to consume content with a number of tools that can serve that need. Just wondering if there's anything that uh, has come to light in the last couple of years because of the heightened sensitivity around needing to address these hybrid environments, and that you're able to bring to bear with Spectrio that may not be as obvious. Just thinking about kind of extending digital signage into other elements of the communication strategy.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Jay. And I mean, there's a few ways to tackle that. The way that we've seen the most traction is by leveraging the same content, but serving it up to different platforms. So that means digital signs are just one element, touch screens are another. But then, moreover, you mentioned hybrid. You have people who aren't in the office, aren't seeing digital signs, aren't near a digital sign. Being able to push that content to their desktop, either through a notification, as a screensaver, a combination of the two, helps us with that, delivering that content to other types of endpoints like a mobile device. Again, hits them where they need to be hit. One thing that we really work on with our clients is making sure that we're providing the information in a way that is consumable in an area of high dwell. So how interfacing with the employee the way they expect to be interfaced with. We don't want to blast them while they're trying to get their work done. We want to give them the ability to consume the information on their own time. So you have to give them multiple ways to hit it. But then the other side of that is you need to make sure you have the amount of repetition in place so that the audience actually retains the information. It's no different from marketing where you say 7 to 12 touches to get a message across to sell a product. It's the same thing with selling
Yeah.
a sign up for open enrollment. You have to keep reiterating the message and hitting them in multiple different angles.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think elaborating on one thing is looking at it as a marketing content strategy, right? So we're used to working with the partners to build out their external marketing strategy to drive sales, whatever the case may be. But that same methodology is applicable internally. And so just looking at upcoming quarters, months, specials, various things that happen throughout the year that we know, or better, our partners and their executives know will be a stressful or troubling time, whether it's a big, seasonal sale, whatever the case may be, to really work ahead of time, to be proactive, to build out that content, and then to Christian's point, display it or put the content on the displays that make the most sense.
Yeah, so you guys have seen a number of early adopters, first movers within your client base that have really broadly adopted these strategies. I'm just wondering if maybe we could touch on some of the benefits industry wide and how companies are starting to realize return on these investments, either through as we see here, you know, averages per employee, or maybe more broadly, if you could share some insights as to, how these are improving some of the aspects that you mentioned earlier that are really near and dear to Sony's focus, which is, diversity, equity, and inclusion. That inclusion piece being a really difficult one to tackle in a hybrid working environment, and equity of access to information being another challenge. So I just wonder if maybe there's some elements that you could expand on in that regard.
Yeah, totally. So, when we look at retaining top talent, that's a big thing for us. We uncovered it a few years ago when working with law firms, where we just discovered that the major problems facing law firms was retention of their partners, and the cost to retain a partner was much less than the cost to replace a partner. And when you unpack that even further, and we did even more research, it really spans across multiple industries and verticals, with that average being that $4,800. So if we can keep the employee engaged and we can make them feel valued and included in the organization, we know we can retain that talent, and that's going to impact the bottom line. And we see that with employee retention. But then, to your point, Jay, also when we come into retail, there's other tangible elements, right? It's not just retaining the employee. It's not just training the employees on the impact or how to impact the customer better. It's also how do we make sure that these employees understand how they're performing, and most importantly, how they can improve. And when you do that, you realize ROI around employee retention, or I'm sorry, not employee retention. You see customer satisfaction go up, and that's something that most retailers today are actually looking at that metric even more so than sales numbers to show how that store or that location is performing. So there's a lot of value in these types of solutions, but it really comes down to you got to make sure you provide these organizations with the right framework to put this platform into place. Like the content strategy has a framework, and we've worked on a number of them over the years, and we've found the right mix that makes the most sense. And that's really critical. It's not just like we're going to hang screens and then all of a sudden magic is going to happen. Like there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, I think the idea of a set it and forget it strategy is passe, and that's really given rise to a lot of dynamic, integrated solutions that can drive and make this content most relevant. Um, so it's a great uh, entree into a discussion around the solution in general, right? Like um, there's a number of stakeholders typical in corporate communications and employee engagement strategies, from HR to safety to product managers. There might be emergency messaging notifications that need to be incorporated. Can you kind of paint some broad strokes on what the solution typically entails, and how you want to bring those solutions to bear within the environments for your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So, really, we actually start with a pretty simple framework, and it goes a couple of different ways. So, number one, we look at, the actual solution of how we bucket the types of communications just to help organizations get their bearings straight. So, you mentioned a lot of different things here, right? We're talking about workers in a manufacturing environment are going to be looking at things like safety instructions, um, metrics on how their production volume is performing. Emergency notifications and mass notifications are a very critical component to across many industries today. It's actually one of the things that we have a lot of conversations and we see a lot of interest because organizations realize it's one thing to keep your employees informed. It's another thing you have to keep them safe, and we have to continue to come up with better ways to inform the workforce and help them understand what's going on in the moment. But core and function to our platform, really, it's looking at number one, making sure that we're helping organizations publicize the wins that they are having and showcasing how the teams that are involved in those wins are celebrating how they got there, right? So making sure everyone feels like they're part of a winning team. The next thing I think is, you mentioned inclusion and equity, promoting the employees for who they are as people and how they are benefiting and including them and how they're helping the organization win, right? Really showcasing that and keeping that very consistent. The other side of that is we see a lot of organizations say the employees feel disconnected from leadership. They don't necessarily understand the why that maybe a strategy is being executed upon. If you give leadership a platform that's very simple for them to in the moment continuously provide nuggets of information to help them project what that vision is, why it's impactful, and why it's important that everyone gets behind that can do wonders in terms of helping employees stay engaged, backing up the message, and really adhering to these new changes in direction.
Yeah, and I mean, just think about what it is today, guys. We have so many hires that we have not met in person, right? Just it's just kind of the way of the world. And if you're not traveling, if you're not on the road at shows or conferences, a lot of times the executives have no personal interaction. So to Christian's point, having the platform and having the ability to quickly show more of a humanistic side to business and to people, and saying, "Hey, this is who I am." I'm giving a message out to everyone. It's a very attractive solution. And I think too, also, we start this by just simply understanding what our clients' overall marketing message is. Understand, and everyone has something, right? So we can start there and say, what do you what if you had the ability to have all your employees in one central place, what would you say? And what would it look like? And then take it from there. And it could be KPI driven. It can be more training. It can be more HR driven. Whatever the case is, whatever's important to them, we can then use the software and solutions to help highlight that.
Yeah, it's a great point. I joined Sony during the pandemic. We're obviously a very large organization with a lot of different business units touching a range of market verticals. I happen to be in the 25 Madison offices here in New York today, and this is as we were talking about just prior to the show, a very cool building to be in, because it's where all of our music labels are headquartered. But a very different culture than a lot of the other part of the organization that I engage with regularly. So some of the digital signage that we have here in this building helps to kind of reinforce some of the cultural attributes to this side of our business.
Mhm.
And I think more to your point, Jimmy, like being able to draw attention to key drivers of any company's corporate culture, points of interest, or things that are going to um, make people feel more included and excited about being in that environment. I would venture a guess that in many cases these are not only tools for retention, but especially with a younger demographic of incoming workforce, it's also serving as an attraction tool.
Right.
And really, that's come to be an expectation coming from corporate college campuses, that already have these types of tools in place. So I wonder if there's any insights that you might be able to lend to that effect, to kind of talk about success metrics that have allowed for companies to kind of transform their culture leveraging these types of tools.
Yeah. So there's a number of ways that we could spin that, and really looking at the metrics that we want to gauge. We want to see, we've run some pilots. I think the one that was really interesting for me was we ran a program with a university where we were measuring dwell time from the content that we were running. So we had cameras and computer vision set up. We weren't using that to trigger different types of content. We were using it to learn what content is most effective, and what can we, how do we twist the dials to get better dwell time and get better response out of the content. And what was really interesting was when we were working on it, it really came down to, it's not just throwing out all of the promotions and all of the things that, all of the different departments within the university felt like all the students and the visitors needed to see. It was really, how do we give them, we need to give them something that creates a habitual need to look at that screen and drive, what are they there for? So in this case, it was, they were in an ice rink and they needed to see their locker assignments. Well, if we put the locker assignments on the screen instead of the little sandwich board a couple steps away, we were forcing the eyes to that screen, and now we had a captive audience to also communicate other information. So when we twisted the dial a bit to combine that with other critical information, we started to see an impact. We started to see the promotions for the pro shop actually see some traction, because we had the right mix of content on the screen, and we knew the dwell time was going through the roof. So that's one way that we've done it. I mean, there's a number of different ways to measure these types of things. I think that was the most interesting one, just because you really could see how it drove the right reaction from the audience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Audience measurement is more commonly used in out of home or retail types of deployments, but as you mentioned, using those same tools, and I'd love for you to expand on what types of tools are available for audience measurement in particular, just for our audience that's maybe not um, deeply informed about those types of applications, but
Mhm.
um, using those tools to validate and remove the anecdotal component for how people determine whether these are successful or not, and put quantifiable metrics around not only reach but engagement, and also to help you drive your content strategy to make it more effective over time, is a great way to ensure that these investments bring as much value to the organization as possible. Can you talk a little bit about audience measurement, and what types of systems or tools are used with Spectrio in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, the nice thing about it is there are a plethora of solutions out there, Jay. I mean, I know you know a bunch, like Covidity is one that comes top of mind that we've worked with in the past. But really, it doesn't really matter to us, because what we're really looking at is the data and the metrics. And then with those metrics, that's where we feed into our platforms, our systems, and make our decisions. So we're fairly agnostic when it comes to that. As long as we can get access to the data, we're good. But yeah, the nice thing about it is it's not just cameras, right? You can use things like Wi-Fi routers that measure devices coming into a room, and leveraging things like near field communications or Bluetooth to measure the audience. We've used cameras in the way to detect the density of the audience in a location. I know that was really big back in the day with when COVID hit. Everyone thought, oh, we have to measure how many people are in this room, but that never really went very far. But it did open us up to new ways to look at how people are tracking through a space, help us make decisions on where we may want to put screens to communicate more effectively. These tools can be really interesting, and it's not just okay. Everyone kind of flashes to the Minority Report example, where we see someone here, so we're going to show a different piece of content. But that's really just that's like the lazy thing to do. Like, we could take this technology and actually make better decisions on what content we're pushing to screens. That's where this becomes really valuable.
Yeah, and like we
Right.
talked about at our last speaking engagement, Jay, Lift and Learn, QSR. I mean, all these things are making a huge comeback, and there's really, to Christian's point earlier, we can integrate with just about anyone. It really depends on what their metrics are, right? But understanding what their goals and metrics are, and then integrating with that, and then having the ability to then showcase and publicize, to Christian's slide earlier.
Yeah, I think because there's so many cloud-based tools now with open APIs that allow for, integration with occupancy sensors or cameras, proximity sensors, like you said, Wi-Fi radio and other, Wi-Fi mesh infrastructure. It's not just about digital signage, it's about optimizing that corporate environment and employee environment to the best effect for any consideration, with digital signage coming into play really as a core communication medium. So let's talk a little bit about what drives the solution in general, and how someone that's interested in starting the journey on digital signage for employee engagement might um, really need to kind of craft a strategy. Can you speak a little bit about that, and kind of in your view what's most critical to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, the first thing we do is we start with the major problems that their organization is facing from a communication standpoint. A lot of times they're pretty similar, but I found over the years most organizations have some unique twist to what they need or what they're trying to solve for. So if we can understand better what their goals are, what their challenges are, and then also who the audience that we're interacting with is and what their needs are, that's where we have to start. We have to craft, understand that problem, and from there we can craft the content strategy. Years ago, I was working with a Goodwill location, in one of their big things was that they were focusing on how do we help not only just our customers, but more importantly, our employees understand what Goodwill does in the community. And we were working with them on this, and we uncovered that there's a number of ways that we can do this, but we have to make sure that whatever we're delivering has some entertaining value to it. It has some, it obviously delivers on the mission and what they're trying to communicate, but then also we realized we needed to have something on the screen that gives that audience a habitual need to look to it. And what we worked with them on was, when you go into a Goodwill store, whether you're an employee or you're an associate, there's a factor called color of the week. And everyone was asking, I think that the stat that the head of communication said was 80% of customers and employees are looking for this information. What's the color of the week? So by putting color of the week on the screens, combined with information around the mission and showcasing some really fun stories around how Goodwill impacted the community, it helped them drive that message home and reiterate that message. So just an example there, but that's the thing. We got to understand what are the challenges, and then look for creative ways to communicate information and combine different types of content to keep people looking at the screens. The next component of that really comes to how do we get it to the screens, and how do we make sure that it's getting there on the right time and it's delivered impactfully and it's getting off of the screens when we want it off the screen. So a solid content management platform is key. Selfish plug. I mean, that's what we're really good at over the years.
Sure.
With all the acquisitions we've made, we've really built a really robust platform and a solution that allows us to deliver content, code, and data to screens really anywhere globally. And then the last piece, which is where Sony comes into play, is having the right hardware to fit the need. And what's really nice about the BRAVIA solution is the fact that it is just a display and the player is built in, and the performance of that player is really high. So we know that when we're looking to tell these stories, we have a really robust hardware platform as well that allows us to get that content to the screen. We know it's going to play back really well, and we know the color is going to be really great. So it's those types of things that we need to look for, but that's what drives that solution.
Awesome. Well, you stole my own shameless plug, but yeah, I think just to reiterate, one of the biggest benefits we found in working with Spectrio, aside from their enthusiasm and expertise in the market, is that their end-plug product works seamlessly right on our BRAVIA display system on a chip, which is a tiny computer right inside of our display. Think of it just like a big Android phone, for lack of a better reference, without the microphone and the speaker, or the camera rather. So because of that, we can run their application directly on our screen, and it's really, really easy to deploy with a couple of different ways to get that running, and scales to thousands of endpoints very easily. That's really the beauty of the architecture with the Spectrio solution. So thank you for taking us through, at a fairly high level for purposes of this conversation, all the things kind of tied to employee engagement. I know we have some questions from the audience, and I wanted to make sure that we left some time for us to drill down on their specific interests. John, I think you've been kind of monitoring the chat feed there on the side as we've been talking. Anything that came across that we can help to clarify?
Sure, Jay. We did have a question from Rob. It came early on in the presentation, so I suspect a number of his points here have been addressed, but I'd like for us to represent Rob's question regardless. And he talks about employee engagement, and I know that there were some great examples given here, but he does want to drill down and say, well, exactly. He hears the term quite often these days, but wants to know exactly what a company means when they say it. And then he asks about the how, which I think we've done a good job here. And Rob, maybe you can put some follow up in the chat and let us know. But I'll turn it over to the group, and maybe we can expound a little bit more on what employee engagement means to us beyond what we've already discussed.
Well, I'd like to say, Rob, thank you for the question. And employee engagement, I believe, is really determined by each individual company and what message and degree of interaction they're looking for with their, in many cases, very diverse workforce. So it can mean different things to different groups. People that work in an office environment on an ongoing basis may need certain information, but those that work in supply chain operations that need at a glance dashboards on staff load and overall performance relative to some of the metrics that they need to execute against to remain efficient, it's totally different. Staff that works in call centers, for example, really need updated information, and there's a gamified component to it that Christian alluded to drive more visibility and reliance on those displays that also can serve a purpose to then deliver critical information that may not be the first priority for those screens. But I'll let the pros talk a little bit more about this. Jimmy,
Yeah.
Christian, any more
Yeah.
insights there?
So no, Jay, that's very, very well said. You kind of stole a little bit of my thunder there. But I'll give one specific example that we haven't touched on. We work with one of the largest media companies across the U.S. and that exact thing, right? So they wanted to use our software and solution and the wonderful Sony displays to help gamify the sales team, right? To have an up-to-date, back when everyone's going to the sales pit and he had a gong and that type of environment there. And they have offices and departments all over the country. And so this large media company is using that software to help gamify and showcase and highlight and celebrate wins and new big deals, et cetera. And also to educate, right? If Tom in the Northeast is won a particular deal, then maybe Sally in the Southeast can do the same thing and trying to share little nuggets of information, but to really publicize it and promote it and include everyone in that win. So that's just one specific example. Rob, that's a great question. Christian, I'm sure you can up me there. What you got?
No, I mean, both really, really well said. Another way to look at it too is how do we help get the employees to participate and be part of the communications and part of, driving, whether that's change for an initiative or awareness of, really like how different organizations are doing it. I know we worked with a large property management company a few years ago, and it was a really fun project where we were helping them craft the content strategy. And I'll never forget the initial digital signage strategy was literally just the CEO kind of doing his ego cast around, this is what makes our company great. And the feedback from employees was, this is crap. Like, we've seen this stuff before. But what was really interesting was when we flipped it and we said, why don't we actually get the employees to generate the content? So obviously there's going to have to be that component for leadership to be involved and actually, talk and be part of the content. But like, what we ended up doing was we worked with them to ship a box of props to all of the different properties. And in the boxes, we had a lot of fun with it. It was like, one I remember was like the green spandex suit. They had some funny hats, just different things that, got the employees to have fun with the content. And the idea was shoot some video of you talking about how you executed on, XYZ company initiative. And the only catch is you've got to have the props in the video. And what was really fun about it was when we did that, it was instantly, you got some really creative content, you got some really fun stories, and you got true collaboration and engagement between these individual buildings that really didn't see each other, maybe have never met each other, but now they see how the other companies or the other parts of the organization are actually, enacting the change or enacting this initiative. And it started to spread ideas. It got really, really popular. They ended up having to push all of the video content to their intranet and to screensavers and to desktops as well, because you had a lot of folks who didn't have access to the digital signs. But that's where I see this becoming a really fun medium too. Like, it becomes this living, breathing communications network that more than just, the internal communications team can be a part of.
Yeah, that's I actually haven't. Christian and I pitch every single day together. I haven't heard you say that, living and breathing. That's such a tangible way to look at it. I'll give one more example. It's not going to be as good as Christian's. That was fantastic, but it's from us. So a couple months ago, we wanted to. We were at the executive leadership. We were discussing, Spectrio's a lot of things. We've acquired a lot of companies. Every company has their own culture and background. So it was really good timing for us to say, who is Spectrio? What do we do? And so we launched an internal elevator pitch contest across the 450 employees, everyone all over the world, and contributed, and it was fantastic. And I tell you, I personally learned so much about how people internally even view our own company. And we launched it on our screensaver technology. And so it was honestly one of the best days I've had in months, going through all, and there was like a 60 seconds. So we were just rifling through them, and they were all really good and fun. And then some people went like the extra mile, made some videos and stuff, and even included some of their own props. So that's another specific idea, Rob. We're giving you two today.
That's great. I mean, the participation, I think, is the key word that wins the day, because that's engagement. It's not one-sided communication. It is an opportunity to have a conversation that's bidirectional and learn from your employees as much as you want them to learn where your direction is going, and get them to buy in ultimately to, so that everybody's working towards the same goal. John, any other questions that came across?
Man, that was a great question from Rob, and it certainly generated quite the discussion here. So thanks for addressing it. We do have another one. It's from Linda, and it's a simple question. She asks, so what is a good estimate for budgetary planning on monthly content service costs? And I guess it's one of these, it depends, right? But I'll throw it out to you guys. Sure.
Tricky. I'll take a swing at saying it definitely depends. It's something that I think a number of companies forget to budget for as an ongoing expense. So factoring in some type of operational expense as a part of an annualized budget strategy is really important. And there's a number of things that can drive into that. But maybe expanding on that further between Christian and Jimmy, you guys can talk about what I think is something that's a really unique offering in your portfolio, which is a content as a service offering.
Yeah, that's right. And it really does vary. I don't mean to sound that vague. It's like as soon as I heard that question, I'm like, here we go. But I mean, yeah, it can be everywhere from $500 a month for a small organization all the way up to 20 or more. It comes down to really, how big is the organization? How frequent do you need the services? Meaning, our CMS is really, really simple to use, and we have a lot of really great features like built-in templates and lots of data integrations and things like that allow us to keep content fresh without a ton of manual management. That being said, where we see a lot of our clients consuming our content services are for the messages that require more of a bespoke feel to them. You really want the message to be loud and proud. Leveraging things like our video services allows you to create very professional content or deploy very professional content on a pretty cost-effective clip. And Jay, to your point, content as a service is really how we achieve that. It's very similar to an agency retainer, if you really want to call it that. I'm not going to make it sound something it's not, but it's great because where we see a lot of organizations, large and small today, they're strapped for resources, and there are lots of things that they want to communicate, but these things come up kind of short notice. And if you don't have the ability to just pick up the phone and say, hey, I need this, this, and this done by next Friday, the process just takes too long. So being able to effectively, work with our clients to understand what do we think our monthly or quarterly content needs are going to be. We've done it for so many years. It's a pretty straightforward process. We can do an initial interview, understand the frequency, the scope, the quantity, and we can work with you to come up with a pretty solid number that's going to, fit budgets and also accomplish your goals. Jimmy, I'm sure you've got a lot to add considering your background there.
No. I think you and Jay both hit on it well. Linda, great question. We love to field any additional questions, answers for you offline, but I will elaborate a little bit. I think the takeaway is that we have tens of thousands of clients that would fall into that small business category, right? That, to Christian's point, have some type of need, but it's relatively entry level. Maybe they've never experienced or really worked with a company like ours to have a mass corporate communication strategy. So we have that entry level offering. But to Christian's point, we have tens of thousands of clients that have they are Fortune 100s, and they have lots of locations. They have very, very large budgets. Their requirements are more bespoke, more custom. So it's really understanding what the need is, and then we can fall in place, right? It's one of those things that, to Christian's point, InPlug is so easy to use that the content strategy, that's where it really gets fun. And understanding where the client or customer is today with their overall marketing needs and where they want to be short term, which is 3-6 months, long term, and 24 months and beyond, and figuring out how to work alongside both their internal agencies. A lot of times, a lot of our larger corporate clients, they have a really good marketing teams internally, but they still will use us for a lot of their marketing needs. But then also, a lot of our clients have retainers with agencies and other marketing firms. So we can work nicely along them as well.
I would imagine that in most cases with your clients that the initial content strategy as it's envisioned is not what ultimately is in place 2, 3, 4 years later, right? This is an iterative process that grows over time as various stakeholders become more familiar with how to engage the owner of the content network, so to speak. There's a lot of opportunity to build upon a baseline. So I think start small, but plan to grow and plan to ensure that there's some degree of ongoing investment to keep that content fresh.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Jay. Usually the first strategy doesn't hit the nail on the head. So you do have to accommodate for that. You have to survey your audience too. Mm-hmm. You have to ask them, is this messaging beneficial to you, and where can you tweak? And we find a lot of times that's where you get the best the best information is, those continued conversations with not just the stakeholders that you work with on a day-to-day basis, but then also the people who are consuming the content, and really let them be very critical of what you're sending out there. That's when you're going to get the best information, and it's going to ultimately give you the best chance of having a solid content strategy that continues to evolve.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. The last thing I'll add to that is that frequency and volume are the key. I mean, and again, that varies, right? What type of content we're producing can vary, both in price point, turnaround times, etc. But the partners and the clients that have the best strategies, that see the most engagements, are the ones that have found a way to create a demand for a lot of content and changing and refreshing and keeping it fresh. I mean, as Christian started the webinar, everyone has most everyone has a phone, and we are glued to it 24/7, right? And so we are used, and we gravitate towards screens, we gravitate towards content, and so our partners that have found the ability to have a consistent and frequent content strategy work very well.
Awesome.
So
what else you got, John?
we actually have a question here from Rashid that really dovetails nicely into the question that you guys just addressed, and it's really so looking at it from another perspective, where he says here that he's using a number of cloud tools, point of sale, CRM, visitor management, and even security systems that tie into their emergency management systems, and asking about, so how can these all be integrated into his corporate comm strategy? So he's probably got some kind of signage, but really needs to tie it all together.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's something that we run into pretty frequently. Anywhere where we can take dynamic data and display it visually on the screen in a way that helps clearly communicate a message, we love to do that, and we really encourage it. And that's everything from, CRM, where we're taking maybe sales metrics and to Jimmy's point earlier, gamifying the sales floor and helping build that sense of camaraderie and healthy competition to help drive sales in the right direction and encourage the right activities to get them there. It's also things like manufacturing data. We have a really great manufacturing client who was struggling at times to make sure that their employees understood the metrics that they were supposed to be adhering to, and basically the productivity numbers. And they tried a number of different things, and every time they did a Gemba walk, it turned out to be like, employees didn't know how many units they had produced that day. They didn't know what the number was. It was just always a mystery. And it was really about that, to Jimmy's point again, that repetition. They weren't getting it. So digital signage in front of each production line made a ton of sense. But then pulling in those metrics in real time was where we really started to see things start to move. And that was a healthy competition, but it was also, they now knew where they needed to get to, and they also needed to know how their quality was performing, right? So it's one thing to do everything really, really fast, but if your product is coming out with defects, that's not really accomplishing the mission. So tying the right metrics in at the right time is really, really critical. And with that specific organization, they were able to see a 5% increase in productivity pretty easily by leveraging that kind of a strategy. But there's a number of different ways that we could do that. It's visitor management. Someone's walking into a building, welcoming a specific prospect or potential client and making them feel valued. It's showing the information outside of the conference room to let you know if that room is available or not, or what meeting is going on in there, so you're able to find your meeting. Anywhere where we could tie in data, you're going to tend to see that the content is more impactful and more relevant to the audience.
Outstanding. Well, we're almost at time, and I don't see any other questions in the chat panel. Christian, Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us. Jay, thank you for moderating and leading this discussion. A couple of things I wanted to mention, as well as a couple of reminders. So, as I mentioned before at the beginning of the webinar, that Spectrio is one of our longest standing alliance partners, and they're part of the Sony Pro Alliance Partner Network. And we're going to drop a link to that in the chat. We've also dropped a link to Spectrio's website. I encourage everyone to go out and explore their website and reach out to them, reach out to us, and we can assist you in resolving or establishing your whether it's your signage solution or your corporate communication strategy. We can help you with both. Seeing as it's May, that can only mean one thing. We're about 6 weeks away from InfoComm, and we're hoping to see many of you on this webinar there. I know that Sony will be there at booth 1701, and Spectrio will be there at booth 155, and we will also have have Spectrio in our booth, so they'll have a presence within the Sony booth as well, and you can see some of these solutions and examples up close at the show. So, lastly, speaking of InfoComm, our next Tech Tuesday webinar will be on June the 6th, Tuesday, June the 6th, and it will be a pre-InfoComm sneak peek. So I encourage everyone to mark your calendar and to be sure to join us. You won't want to miss it. And again, as always, we thank everyone for your time, and we welcome your feedback as well as your suggestions on what you'd like to see in future Tech Tuesday webinars. So, Christian, Jimmy, thanks again. Really appreciate your time, and we'll see
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks,
John,
guys.
thanks so much. Jay, awesome. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Sony. We really enjoyed it today. We look forward to growing the partnership in the future.